The chaos in the assembly hall continued for nearly an hour as both human and Kethra delegates argued furiously about Jake's unexpected proposal. Admiral Carter had ordered security to arrest him, but the guard seemed uncertain about interfering with what might be the most important diplomatic moment in human history. Meanwhile, the Kethra were producing harmonic patterns so complex that the translation systems had given up trying to convert them into human language. Through it all, Jake stood calmly in the center of the storm he had created, holding the alternative: alliance documents and waiting for responses from Earth and the Kethra homeworld. Amy had managed to keep the communication channels open despite Admiral Carter's orders to cut them, which meant that leaders on both worlds were watching everything unfold in real time. The first response came from Earth. President Helen Martinez appeared on the main screen, flanked by the members of the Global Defense Council. Her expression was stern but not angry, which Jake took as a positive sign. "Lieutenant Commander Morrison," she said, her voice cutting through the noise in the assembly hall, "you have created quite a situation here. I hope you understand the implications of what you've done." "I understand that humanity's survival depends on making the right choice here, Madam President," Jake replied. "Not the safe choice or the easy choice, but the right one." President Martinez nodded slowly. "The Global Defense Council has been reviewing your alternative proposal for the past 45 minutes. We've also been examining the historical records you referenced regarding previous Kethra alliances." Admiral Carter stepped forward. "Madam President, Lieutenant Commander Morrison acted without authorization and may have compromised our negotiations with the Kethra." "On the contrary, Admiral," President Martinez said firmly, "Lieutenant Commander Morrison may have saved our species from making a fatal mistake. The casualty rates among previous Kethra allies are indeed alarming, and the remote control capabilities built into their technology represent an unacceptable threat to human sovereignty." Jake felt a wave of relief wash over him. Earth's leadership was taking his warnings seriously instead of simply dismissing them as insubordination. Therefore, President Martinez continued, "The Global Defense Council endorses Lieutenant Commander Morrison's modified alliance proposal. Humanity will fight alongside the Kethra as equals, not subordinates. We will use our own tactics and maintain full control over our military forces." The human delegates in the assembly hall erupted in discussion while the Kethra harmonic communications became even more intense. Senior Council member Vorthkaler Shell was cycling rapidly between different colors, indicating what Jake had learned was extreme agitation. "The humans reject proper alliance structure," Vorthkaler declared through the translation system. "This chaos cannot produce effective military cooperation." "With respect, Council member," President Martinez said from the screen, "effective military cooperation requires trust between equals. Subordination is not cooperation, it's exploitation." Jake noticed that Zixthara had moved closer to where he stood, HER Shell, showing the pale blue that indicated hope mixed with fear. She caught his eye and made a subtle gesture that Jake interpreted as encouragement. The response from the Kethra homeworld took much longer to arrive. For 3 hours, the assembly hall remained in a state of suspended tension while the Council of Minds conducted their harmonic deliberations. Jake used the time to explain his proposal in detail to the human delegates, many of whom had initially been skeptical but were beginning to see the logic in his approach. Dr. Walsh, despite his initial excitement about the original alliance, admitted that the historical pattern was troubling. If 7 previous allies have suffered such devastating losses, we need to seriously consider whether Kethra military doctrine is compatible with human survival. Even Admiral Carter seemed to be reconsidering her position. "I still think your methods were inappropriate, Morrison, but I can't argue with your conclusions about the risks we were facing." When the Kethra response finally came, it was unlike anything Jake had expected. The main screen showed not just the Council of Minds, but what appeared to be thousands of Kethera from across their surviving worlds. Their harmonic communications created a sound so beautiful and complex that many humans in the assembly hall stopped talking just to listen. The translation came through in the voice of the council speaker, but Jake could hear the underlying harmonics that indicated this was a historic moment for the Kethera as well. For 1,000 years, the Council of Minds has directed Kethera military efforts according to the principles of order, hierarchy, and coordinated response, the speaker announced. For 1,000 years, these efforts have failed to stop the Vorthic advance. Senior Council member Vorthkaler's shell went completely transparent with shock. Even among the Kethera, this admission was apparently unprecedented. The human Morrison has forced us to confront a truth we have been unwilling to acknowledge, the speaker continued. Our methods of warfare, while logical and efficient, are predictable to an enemy that thinks with billions of coordinated minds. Perhaps it is time to embrace the unpredictable. Jake felt his heart racing as he realized what was happening. The Kethera Council of Minds was actually considering his proposal. Therefore, for the first time in our recorded history, the Kethera Collective will cede tactical command authority to another species. Humans will fight as humans, using human methods and human decision-making processes. We will provide technology and support, but we will not control. The assembly hall fell completely silent. Even the Kethera had stopped their harmonic communications, creating a moment of perfect quiet that Jake would remember for the rest of his life. And Zixthara stepped forward, her shell glowing with colors Jake had never seen before. The human approach has already begun changing us, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silence. For the first time in centuries, the council made a decision based on hope rather than fear. Perhaps this is what we needed all along, not to control the unpredictable, but to become unpredictable ourselves. Over the following days, the details of the new alliance were worked out with remarkable speed. Human and Kethera engineers collaborated to modify the technology transfers, removing all remote control capabilities while maintaining effectiveness. Military planners from both species developed coordination protocols that allowed for independent operation while sharing intelligence and resources. Jake found himself promoted to Alliance Coordinator despite Admiral Carter's initial reservations about his unorthodox methods. His first official act was to recommend Zixthara as the Kethera liaison, a position that would allow her to work directly with human forces while maintaining her connection to Kethera leadership. The real test came sooner than anyone expected. Long-range sensors detected the Vorthic swarm at the edge of the solar system, moving faster than predicted and heading directly for Earth. The combined human Kethera fleet had barely finished assembling when the order came to intercept the enemy. Before they could reach inhabited worlds. As Jake stood on the bridge of the human flagship beside Zixthara, watching the mixed fleet of human and Kethera ships moving in loose formation rather than rigid lines, he felt a mixture of hope and terror. They were about to test whether chaos could really defeat perfect order. "Your people are ready?" Zixthara asked, her shell showing colors that Jake now recognized as determination mixed with affection. "As ready as we can be for something we've never done before," Jake replied. "What about yours?" "The Kethera have never fought a battle where the outcome was truly uncertain," Zixthara admitted. "It is terrifying and exhilarating at the same time." The last communication Jake received before the fleet entered hyperspace came from Earth, transmitted on all frequencies so that every ship in the combined fleet could hear it. "Good hunting, Commander Morrison," President Martinez said. "Show them what humanity can do when we're free to be ourselves." As the stars stretched into lines and the fleet jumped toward an uncertain future, Jake realized that win or lose, they had already achieved something remarkable. They had proven that true partnership was possible between different species. and that sometimes the greatest strength came from embracing uncertainty rather than trying to control it. The war against the Vorthik was just beginning, but for the first time in 1,000 years, both humans and Kethera faced the future with genuine hope. Jake spent the next 3 days working in secret with Amy Rodriguez and a small team of trusted humans to develop their alternative proposal. Engineer Pete Sullivan helped design modifications to Kethera, technology that would remove remote control capabilities while maintaining effectiveness. Dr. Beth Collins, the station's xenobiologist, provided insights into how human and Kethera forces could work together without integrated command structures. The plan was risky beyond anything Jake had ever attempted. Instead of accepting junior partnership in the Kethera hierarchy, humans would operate as a completely independent force. They would use modified Kethera technology that couldn't be shut down remotely, and they would fight using human tactics rather than Kethera military doctrine. This could work, Pete said as he finished the technical specifications. The Kethera power systems are incredibly advanced, but they're also incredibly complex. If we simplify them and remove the control interfaces, they'll actually be more reliable for our purposes. Dr. Collins nodded in agreement. From a biological standpoint, humans and Kethera have completely different neural structures. What looks like chaos to them might actually be a more efficient way for us to process tactical information. Amy looked over the proposal documents. The question is how we get both sides to even consider this. Admiral Carter is set on accepting the original alliance terms, and from what you've told me about the Kethera Council, they're not exactly open to new ideas. Jake had been thinking about this problem for days. We need to present both sides with the alternative simultaneously, so neither one can reject it before the other has a chance to respond. If we can create enough chaos in the negotiations themselves, maybe we can force everyone to consider options they wouldn't normally think about. That sounds incredibly dangerous, Dr. Collins warned. If this goes wrong, we could end up with no alliance at all and humanity facing the Vorthik alone. If we accept the current alliance terms, humanity gets consumed anyway, Jake pointed out. At least this way we have a chance. Zixthara had been helping them whenever she could meet without arousing suspicion from the other Kethera delegates. During their secret meetings, she provided crucial information about Kethera technology and tactical capabilities. She also warned Jake about the challenges they would face. The Council of Minds makes decisions through harmonic consensus, she explained. They literally vibrate their shells in specific patterns to communicate complex ideas for them to accept. Your proposal, you would need to present it in a way that disrupts their normal decision-making process. What kind of disruption? Jake asked. Something that forces them to respond immediately rather than deliberating through their usual methods, Zixthara said. The Council fears quick decisions because they believe only careful consensus can produce reliable results. Jake realized that the formal signing ceremony, scheduled for the next day, would be the perfect opportunity. Both human and Kethera leadership would be present, along with communication links to Earth and the Kethera homeworld. If he could disrupt the ceremony at exactly the right moment, he might be able to force both sides to consider his alternative. The morning of the ceremony, Jake felt his nerves threatening to overwhelm him. He had barely slept the night before, going over the plan again and again with Amy and the others. They had positioned themselves throughout the station to carry out their part of the operation when Jake gave the signal. Admiral Carter looked nervous, but excited as she prepared for what she believed would be the most important moment in human history. Dr. Walsh was practically vibrating with anticipation about the technological advances the Alliance would bring. The Kethera delegation, led by senior council member Vorth Kaler, maintained their usual composed demeanor that the ceremony took place in the station's main assembly hall, which had been decorated with both human and Kethera symbols. Large screens showed the faces of leaders back on Earth and distant views of the Cathera homeworld. Jake stood with the other liaison officers, trying to look calm while his heart pounded. Admiral Carter stepped forward to address the assembled crowd. Today marks a new era for humanity. We stand ready to join our Cathera allies in defending our galaxy against the threat of the Vorthic Empire. Senior Council Member Vorth Kaler responded with a series of harmonic tones that the translation system rendered his formal acceptance. The Cathera Collective welcomes humanity into our defensive alliance. Together, we shall bring order to chaos and defeat those who would consume all life. Jake noticed Zixthara standing with the other Cathera delegates, HER shell showing the pale blue color that indicated nervousness. She caught his eye briefly, and Jake saw what might have been encouragement in her hundreds of crystalline eyes. Admiral Carter reached for the Alliance documents, her hand moving toward the pen that would bind humanity to Cathera command structure. Jake knew this was his moment. If he waited any longer, it would be too late. "Wait," Jake said loudly, stepping forward from his position with the other officers. The entire hall fell silent. Admiral Carter froze with her hand inches from the pen. The Cathera delegates began vibrating their shells in what Jake had learned were alarm harmonics. "Lieutenant Commander Morrison," Admiral Carter said sharply, "this is not the time for interruptions." "Actually, Admiral, this is exactly the time," Jake replied, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. "Before you sign that document, both humanity and the Cathera need to hear about an alternative that could save both our species." The Cathera began vibrating more intensely, their harmonic communications creating a complex symphony of confusion and anger. Senior Council Member Vorth Kaler stepped forward, his massive shell shifting to a deep red color. "This human speaks without authorization," Vorth Kaler declared. "The terms of alliance have been agreed upon through proper diplomatic channels." "The terms of alliance are a death sentence for humanity," Jake said firmly. "Just like they were for the Zelani Confederacy, the Threx Empire, the Morvok species, and every other race the Cathera have allied with." Gasps echoed through the human side of the assembly. Admiral Carter's face went white. "Morrison, you're out of line. Stand down immediately." Jake ignored her and continued speaking, knowing he had only moments before security would stop him. The Cathera integration protocols turn allied species into remote-controlled soldiers. Every piece of technology they provide comes with kill switches that ensure no ally can ever threaten Cathera interests. The Cathera harmonic communications reached a fever pitch, but Jake noticed that Zixthara had gone completely silent. Senior Council Member Vorth Kaler's shell was now pulsing between red and black, colors Jake had never seen before. "These accusations are false," Vorth Kaler announced. "Humans lack the knowledge to understand Cathera military doctrine." "Then, explain why 7 allied species have gone extinct fighting your wars," Jake challenged. "Explain why the Vorthic have never been stopped by any traditional military approach you've tried." At that moment, Amy activated the station's communication systems from her position in the control room. Jake's words and the entire confrontation were being broadcast directly to Earth and the Cathera homeworld, bypassing normal diplomatic channels. "I'm presenting an alternative alliance proposal," Jake declared, pulling out the documents his team had prepared. "Humanity fights as an independent force using modified Cathera technology that can't be remotely controlled. We use human tactics and human decision-making instead of being integrated into Cathera command structure." The chaos in the assembly hall was exactly what Jake had hoped for. Human delegates were shouting questions, while Cathera harmonics created a deafening wall of sound. Admiral Carter was demanding Jake's arrest, while Dr. Walsh was trying to examine the alternative proposal documents. But the most important reactions were coming through the communication links. On Earth, President Helen Martinez was calling for an emergency session of the Global Defense Council. On the Cathera homeworld, The harmonic patterns indicated that the entire Council of Minds was being forced into immediate deliberation. You have created chaos where order was required, Senior Council Member Vorth Kaler said, his shell now completely black with anger. Sometimes chaos is exactly what's required, Jake replied, looking directly at Zixthara. You gave us one opportunity. This is ours. Jake stared at Zixthara as the haunting sounds continued to flow from her crystal shell. He had never imagined that an alien could sound so broken, so filled with despair. The harmonics seemed to carry emotions that went beyond simple sadness into something much deeper and more painful. What do you mean? Jake asked softly. What are you really? Zixthara's shell slowly shifted back to a pale blue color, but the harmonics continued for several more moments before fading away. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that Jake had never heard before. We are the last survivors of a species that once numbered in the trillions, she said. The Kethera collective was not always collective. We were individuals once, each with our own thoughts and dreams and fears. But that was before the Vorthic came to our worlds. Jake felt his understanding of everything shift. The Vorthic attacked you first? The Vorthic do not attack in the way your species understands warfare, Zixthara explained. They consume. They arrive at a world and begin the process of absorption. Every living thing becomes part of their collective consciousness. Every thought, every memory, every skill becomes theirs to use. She moved closer to the observation window, her many eyes reflecting the starlight. My homeworld was called Kathmiran. It had oceans of liquid crystal and cities that sang in the wind. Billions of my people lived there in harmony with our environment. When the Vorthic came, it took them only 3 days to consume everything. But you escaped, Jake said. Some of us did, Zixthara confirmed. We had ships in deep space when the absorption began. We watched our world die from a distance, helpless to stop what was happening. We watched our families and friends disappear into the collective, their individual voices lost forever in that terrible unity. Jake tried to imagine watching Earth, being consumed by an alien force, and felt sick. How many of you survived? Perhaps 1 million across all our worlds, Zixthara said. From trillions down to 1 million in less than a year. We became refugees in our own galaxy, running from world to world as the Vorthic expanded their territory. And the other species you allied with? Jake asked. The ones in the historical records? Zixthara's shell darkened. We told ourselves we were saving them. We offered our technology in exchange for military cooperation because we believed that together we could stop the Vorthic advance. But we were wrong. We were so terribly wrong. She turned away from the window to face Jake. Directly. The Kethera Council of Minds believed that disciplined military action was the key to victory. They insisted on maintaining command structure and tactical control. Every species we allied with was integrated into our hierarchy and their forces were deployed according to our strategic plans. And they all failed, Jake said. They all died, Zixthara corrected. The Vorthic collective consciousness is perfect at predicting logical military responses. Our carefully planned attacks, our coordinated strategies, our disciplined formations, the Vorthic, could anticipate everything because they think with billions of minds working in perfect harmony. Jake was beginning to understand. So you need something unpredictable. Yes, Zixthara said, with something that might have been hope creeping into her voice. Humans are chaos. Your species does things that make no logical sense. You take risks that no rational being would consider. You refuse to accept limitations that other species see as absolute facts. But your council still wants to control. U.S., Jake pointed out. The alliance terms put human forces under Kethera command, just like all the others. Zixthara's shell went completely transparent again, revealing the soft tissue underneath. The Council of Minds cannot comprehend how to use chaos without controlling it. They see human unpredictability as a valuable resource that must be properly managed and directed. They do not understand that managing chaos destroys the very thing that makes it powerful. So signing this alliance would turn us into just another failed species, Jake said. Yes, Zixtara whispered. And I have been helping them do it because I am too much of a coward to stand against my own people. Jake felt a mixture of anger and sympathy. Why are you telling me this now? Because I have been watching you and your fellow humans for days, Zixtara explained. I see how you think, how you approach problems, how you refuse to simply accept what you are told. When you began investigating our history, instead of just accepting our offer, I realized that you might be the key to everything. The key to what? To saving both our species, Zixtara said. The Voithic are less than 18 months from reaching human space. If we continue with the planned alliance, humanity will be consumed just like all the others. But if we can find a way to use human chaos without destroying it, we might actually have a chance. Jake walked over to stand beside her at the window, looking out at the stars that suddenly seemed much more dangerous. What do you think we should do? I do not know, Zixtara admitted. The Council of Minds has already decided on the alliance. Terms. They will not change their approach because they cannot conceive of any other way to conduct warfare. And your Admiral Carter seems eager to accept whatever we offer. Then we need to give them something else to consider, Jake said slowly. Something that shows both sides there's another option. Over the next several days, Jake and Zixtara met in secret whenever possible. She began sharing information that had never been included in any official alliance documents. Details about Vorthic capabilities, weaknesses in their collective, consciousness, and most importantly, the few times that chaotic actions had actually succeeded against them. There was a small species called the Riloth, Zixtara told him during one of their hidden meetings. They had no advanced technology, no military discipline, no strategic planning capabilities. When the Vorthic came to their world, the Riloth simply scattered in every direction, doing completely random things. What happened? Jake asked. The Vorthic collective could not predict their actions because there was no pattern to predict, Zixtara explained. For the first time in recorded history, a species actually slowed down a Vorthic advance. Not stopped, but slowed. What happened? To the Riloth? Zixtara's shell darkened. The Kethra found them and offered alliance. We integrated them into our command structure and deployed them in coordinated attacks. They were consumed within months. Jake felt a growing sense of urgency. We have to find a way to convince both sides that there's a better approach. Something that lets humans fight as humans instead of as Kethra auxiliaries. The Council will never agree, Zixtara said. They fear chaos more than they fear the Vorthic. Then maybe it's time for them to learn that fear isn't always a good guide, Jake said. He began working with Amy Rodriguez and a few other trusted humans to develop an alternative proposal. Instead of joining the Kethra hierarchy, humans would operate as an independent force using modified technology that couldn't be remotely controlled. It was a huge risk because it meant rejecting the protection that Kethra command structure might provide, but Jake was beginning to realize that protection was an illusion anyway. Every species that had accepted Kethra protection had ended up extinct. At least fighting independently would give humanity a chance to use their greatest strength. The problem was convincing both human and Kethra leadership to accept a plan that went against everything they thought they knew about warfare. Jake knew he would need to take a dramatic risk to force both sides to consider alternatives. Zixtara seemed to understand what he was thinking. If you do what I believe you are planning, there will be no going back. The Council will see it as betrayal, and your own leaders may see it as treason. Sometimes the only way to save everyone is to risk everything, Jake said. Isn't that exactly the kind of chaotic thinking you say we need? For the first time since he had known her, Zixthara's crystal shell showed what he was certain was a smile. Jake could not sleep that night after Zixthara's declaration. Her desperate words kept echoing in his mind, along with the fear he had seen in those hundreds of crystalline eyes. Something was wrong with this whole situation, but he could not figure out what it was. The next morning he found Captain Amy Rodriguez in the station's small cafeteria, picking at a plate of synthesized eggs that looked more like yellow plastic than real food. Amy had been his friend since their academy days, and one of the few people on Meridian who shared his skeptical nature. "You look like someone who didn't sleep," Amy said as Jake sat down across from her with his coffee. "Let me guess, our new alien friends are keeping you up at night." "Something's not right about this alliance," Jake said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "Zixthara is hiding something important, and I think we need to figure out what it is before Admiral Carter signs anything." Amy raised an eyebrow. "You mean besides the fact that we're being asked to join a galactic war against an enemy we know nothing about? What could possibly be suspicious about that?" Jake appreciated Amy's sarcasm, but this was serious. "She gave me access to some of their historical databases yesterday. I've been going through the files all night, and there are patterns that don't make sense." "What kind of patterns?" Amy asked, her expression becoming more serious. "The Kethra have made similar alliances with other species before, 7 different times over the past 1,000 years. Each time they offered advanced technology in exchange for military cooperation against various threats." Amy frowned. "That doesn't sound suspicious by itself. If they're fighting multiple wars, they would need multiple allies." "That's what I thought at first," Jake said. "But look at what happened to those allies." He pulled out his datapad and showed her the files he had been studying. The Zelani Confederacy lost 90% of their military forces in the first year of fighting. The Threx Empire collapsed completely after their alliance with the Kethra. The Morvex species is now listed as extinct. The color drained from Amy's face as she read through the data. "These casualty rates are insane. It's like they were used as cannon fodder." "Exactly," Jake said. "And there's something else. Every one of these species was described as having unique tactical capabilities that the Kethra needed for their war efforts. The same thing they're saying about humans now." Amy pushed her breakfast away, suddenly looking sick. "You think they're recruiting us to be disposable soldiers?" "I don't know yet, but I intend to find out," Jake said. "The problem is that Zixthara has been watching me closely since our meeting yesterday. I think she suspects that I'm getting suspicious." "What do you need me to do?" Amy asked without hesitation. Jake had hoped she would offer to help. "Can you access the station's communication logs? I want to see exactly what the Kethra transmitted when they first contacted us. There might be something in their initial messages that reveals their real intentions." Amy nodded. "I can do that, but it will take some time. The Admiral has those files locked down pretty tight, and I'll need to be careful not to trigger any security alerts." They agreed to meet later that evening in Maintenance Tunnel C7, a section of the station that was rarely monitored and far from the main areas where the Kethra delegation was staying. Jake spent the rest of the day trying to act normal during his meetings with Zixthara, while secretly copying as much data as he could access. The alien seemed more agitated than usual, her crystal shell shifting between different shades of blue and yellow. During their afternoon session, she kept asking about human military capabilities and seemed particularly interested in how quickly Earth could mobilize its fleet. "Your species builds ships very rapidly," Zixthara observed as they reviewed human naval records. "This efficiency will be valuable in the coming conflict." How valuable? Jake asked carefully. What kind of losses do you expect in this war? Zixthara's shell went completely transparent for a moment before returning to its normal blue color. War always involves sacrifice. The Kethera have learned to accept necessary losses for the greater good. Necessary losses, Jake repeated. What exactly do you consider necessary? Whatever is required to defeat the Vorthik, Zixthara said firmly. Your species will understand this once you see what they are capable of. That evening, Jake made his way to the maintenance tunnel, checking several times to make sure he wasn't being followed. Amy was already there, waiting for him with her own data pad full of information. You're not going to like what I found, she said immediately. The Kethra's first message to Earth wasn't a request for alliance. It was a demand for surrender. Jake stared at her. What do you mean surrender? I mean, they told Earth to submit to Kethera authority or face conquest, Amy explained. It was only after our response indicated that humans would fight rather than surrender that they changed their approach to offering an alliance. So they were planning to conquer us originally? Jake asked. It gets worse, Amy continued. I also found records of their communications with other Kethera ships. They refer to humans as the latest recruitment batch and discuss something called optimization protocols for our military forces. Jake felt his stomach turn. Optimization protocols? Amy showed him the translated files. As near as I can tell, it's a process where they modify the technology they give to allied species. The modifications include remote control capabilities and what they call loyalty enforcement systems. They're planning to turn us into remote-controlled soldiers, Jake said with growing horror. That's what it looks like, Amy agreed. The technology comes with built-in kill switches that let the Kethera shut down any equipment they provide. No allied species has ever been able to turn Kethera weapons against the Kethera themselves. Jake sat down heavily on a maintenance crate. Everything was starting to make sense now. The Kethera weren't looking for allies. They were recruiting slave armies to fight their wars for them. The advanced technology was just a leash disguised as a gift. We have to tell Admiral Carter, Jake said. Tell her what exactly? Amy asked. That I illegally accessed classified communications? That you've been spying on our potential alien allies? She'll court-martial us both before she listens to anything we have to say. Jake knew Amy was right. They needed more evidence, something. That couldn't be dismissed as paranoia or insubordination. I need to confront Zixthara directly. If I can get her to admit what's really going on, maybe we can record it. That's incredibly dangerous, Amy warned. If she realizes what you know, she might decide that humans are too troublesome to recruit. Maybe. That would be better than the alternative, Jake said grimly. The next morning, Jake requested a private meeting with Zixthara in the observation deck, a small area with large windows that looked out at the stars. He had chosen the location carefully because it was far from any official recording equipment, and he hoped the informal setting might make her more willing to speak honestly. Zixthara arrived exactly on time, her crystal shell reflecting the light from nearby stars. She seemed nervous, her many eyes darting around the room as if looking for threats. You wanted to speak privately, she said. This is unusual for a human liaison officer. Jake took a deep breath and decided to take the direct approach. I've been reviewing the files you gave me access to, the records of previous Kethera alliances with other species. Zixthara's shell immediately shifted to a pale yellow color. Those files contain valuable historical information about our past conflicts. They contain records of 7 species that were nearly wiped out fighting your wars, Jake said bluntly. Species that were promised advanced technology in exchange for military cooperation. Species that ended up as cannon fodder for Kethera objectives. For a long moment, Zixthara said nothing. Her crystal shell cycled through several different colors before settling on a deep red that Jake had never seen before. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You understand," she said, and to Jake's amazement she began to make a sound that could only be described as crying. High-pitched harmonics resonated through her crystal shell, creating a haunting melody of grief and despair. "Finally, one of you understands what we truly are." Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he walked down the metal corridors of Research Station Meridian. 3 years he had been stuck out here in the middle of nowhere, watching stars and filing reports that nobody back on Earth seemed to care about. The deep space assignment was supposed to be temporary, but temporary had a way of becoming permanent. When you were this far from home, the station hummed around him with the usual sounds of life support and computer systems. Jake knew every sound by now, every vibration, every smell of recycled air and protein paste meals. He was thinking about requesting another transfer when the alarm started going off. "All personnel to stations," came the voice over the intercom. "Unknown vessels approaching. This is not a drill." Jake ran to the command center, where Admiral Lisa Carter was already barking orders. Through the massive viewing window, he could see them coming. Ships unlike anything in human design, moving in perfect formation like a school of fish made of metal and crystal. They were beautiful and terrifying at the same time. "First contact protocols are in effect," Admiral Carter announced. "Dr. Kevin Walsh will handle initial communications. All military personnel remain on standby." The ships stopped just outside. Weapons range, which Jake thought was either very polite or very calculated. The largest vessel, easily 3 times the size of Meridian Station, sent out a single shuttle. Jake watched it dock with their station, his heart pounding with excitement and fear. The airlock cycled, and Jake got his first look at an alien. The creature that emerged was like nothing from any movie or book he had ever seen. It stood on 6 legs, each ending in delicate claws that clicked against the metal floor. Its body was covered in what looked like living crystal that shifted colors as it moved. Most striking were its eyes, hundreds of them covering its head like a crown of black diamonds. "I am Senior Tactician Zixthara of the Kethera Collective," the creature said through a translation device that hung around what might have been its neck. "We come seeking alliance with the human species." Admiral Carter stepped forward, her military bearing intact despite the historic moment. "I am Admiral Lisa Carter, commanding officer of this station. We welcome you in peace." Dr. Walsh, a thin man with nervous hands, fumbled with his recording equipment. "This is incredible," he whispered. "First contact, and they speak of alliance." Immediately, Zixthara's crystal shell shifted to a deeper blue color. "Time is short. The Vorthic Empire advances on this sector of space. They consume all life, all knowledge, all hope. Only together can our species survive what is coming." Jake found himself assigned as one of the human liaisons, probably because he had the most experience with alien languages from his academy. Training. Not that he had ever expected to use that training on actual aliens. He was paired directly with Zixthara, which both honored and terrified him. Their first meeting took place in a small conference room that had been hastily prepared for negotiations. Jake sat across from the alien, trying not to stare at the way her crystal shell caught the light. Hundreds of tiny eyes seemed to track his every movement. "You are nervous," Zixthara observed. "This is understandable. Your species has never encountered the Kethera before." "That's putting it mildly," Jake replied. "Yesterday, my biggest concern was whether the coffee synthesizer was working properly. Today, I'm negotiating with someone from another star system. Something that might have been amusement flickered across Zixthara's shell. Your species adapts quickly. This is why we chose to approach humans first among the younger races." "Younger races?" Jake asked. "How many species are out there?" In this galaxy, thousands. Most are primitive, barely past their home worlds. Some, like the Kethera, have built great civilizations spanning many star systems. And some, her shell darkened, have become something else entirely. Zixthara explained about the Vorthic Empire, though empire was the wrong word. The Vorthic were a collective consciousness that had once been individual beings like humans and Kethera. Somehow they had merged their minds into a single entity that fought with 1 billion brains and acted with perfect coordination. They move from system to system, consuming everything, Zixthara continued. Not just resources or territory, but knowledge, experience, the very essence of what makes a species unique. They add it all to their collective, and what remains is nothing but empty worlds. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. How long before they reach Earth? By our calculations, 18 of your months if they maintain current expansion rates. Less if they discover a direct hyperspace route to your system. The negotiations continued for days. The Kethera offered technology that would advance human civilization by centuries. Quantum tunneling drives that could cross the galaxy in weeks instead of years. Energy weapons that could crack planets. Defensive shields that could protect entire solar systems. In return, they wanted human participation in their war against the Vorthic. Not just ships and resources, but human creativity and tactical thinking. They claimed that human unpredictability was exactly what they needed to break the stalemate. Jake should have been excited. This was the greatest opportunity in human history. But something bothered him about the whole situation, something he couldn't quite identify. Zixthara seemed eager, almost desperate for the alliance to succeed. Too eager. During their third planning session, as Jake reviewed the proposed treaty terms, he noticed several clauses that seemed designed to put humans under Kethera command structure. When he asked about them, Zixthara's shell shifted to a nervous yellow color. The Kethera have more experience with galactic warfare, she explained. It would be inefficient for humans to operate independently until they gain proper knowledge. Inefficient for whom? Jake asked quietly. The question seemed to hit Zixthara like a physical blow. Her crystal shell went completely transparent, for a moment revealing the soft tissue underneath. When she spoke again, her voice carried an edge that made Jake's hands tremble. This is your only opportunity. Human act now or regret forever, she declared, her mandibles clicking rapidly. The Vorthic do not offer second chances. Neither do the Kethera. The other human negotiators seemed ready to sign immediately. Admiral Carter spoke of the defensive capabilities the technology would provide. Dr. Walsh was practically drooling over the scientific advances they could make. Everyone was focused on what humanity would gain from the alliance. But Jake found himself watching Zixthara's eyes, those hundreds of black diamonds that seemed to see everything. And what he saw, it wasn't the confidence of a superior species offering help to primitive humans. What he saw looked remarkably like fear. That night, alone in his quarters, Jake stared out at the stars and wondered what the Kethera weren't telling them. The technology was real. He had seen the demonstrations. The threat of the Vorthic seemed genuine based on everything he had learned. But the desperation in Zixthara's voice when she had made her declaration suggested that the Kethera needed this alliance far more than they were admitting. Jake made a decision that would change everything. Instead of focusing on what humanity might gain from the alliance, he decided to find out what the Kethera were really afraid of losing, and why. They seemed so certain that this was humanity's only chance to survive what was coming.